Hello, everyone, and welcome to this MOOC on land matters, integrating soil degradation, concerns, and solutions into policy processes. And for this MOOC, I'm going to present to you on financial mobilization for sustainable land management. And to do this, my name is Andrew Chilombo, and currently I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh. I'm reading for geography and lived environment. And before starting my PhD, I worked for the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, at the World Bank Group in Washington, D.C. And pretty much what I'm going to share with you is based on my experience when I was working for the GEF. To do the presentation, I'm going to run you through, first of all, the basic stats that you probably are familiar with that are regarding, the environmental degradation challenges that we are having and connected to climate change as well as human activities. Having done that, I'm going to then move on to the 3 Rio Conventions that were established as a response to the climate change and human activities challenges. And then I'm going to talk about the GEF, which actually is the core part of my presentation, as a financial mechanism to be able to support countries in need of rehabilitating their environment. I'll then move on to talk about 2 additional potential sources of funding for countries that are interested in restoring degraded lands. So right now, we have been taught that agriculture and forestry alone contribute about a quarter, which is 24% of GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions into the environment. And you've also been told that, about 30% of global land is covered with forests. And 80% of terrestrial animals and plants are actually have the forests as their homes. Unfortunately, the estimation is that 4,000 to 6,000 rainforest species, for example, are experiencing annual extinction. That's a huge amount. And globally, about 2.6 billion people directly, survive on land. So when you combine the climate change and anthropogenic activities on our environment, we are actually digging the grave for the 2.6 billion people who are benefiting directly from the land, who actually depend on land for their livelihoods. As a response to these challenges, at the Earth Summit in 1992, 3 conventions were established, or were born, if you like. And these are the United Nations Convention on United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity or Biodiversity, which is UNCBD. Yeah. And all these 3 conventions have got their own specific mandates. For example, the UNCCD is the only legally binding framework responsible or charged with the responsibility of, let's say, looking after land degradation or desertification. And then the UNFCCC is also charged with the responsibility, or it is concerned with stabilizing at least the green gas emissions in our atmosphere so that, the anthropogenic activities do not interfere with the climate systems. And the UNCBD is managing or is responsible or handles or is charged with the responsibility of looking after biodiversity, essentially, making sure that, there is a sustainable use, and then there's equitable and fair, benefit sharing of the genetic resources. But for these mandates to be effective and actually to be implementable, to be feasible, there was a felt need that a financial mechanism was needed. And this is what led to the birth of the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. And so right now, the GEF sits as a financial mechanism of 5 important conventions. 3, the UNFCCC, UNCCD, and UNCBD, as well as the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, POP, as well as the Minamata Convention on Mercury. In addition to that, we also have the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete ozone layer. We also have convention and the capacity development, but as well as multilateral agreements on international waters and transboundary water systems. So the GEF handles all these financial, these conventions as a financial mechanism, serves as a financial mechanism to all these conventions. So, but how does the GEF exactly work? So the GEF right now works through about 18 agencies. That means the GEF itself, as a financial mechanism, is neither an institution that implements nor an institution that actually executes projects. And these agencies that the GEF works through to implement environmental projects are either regional banks, for example, African Development Bank, we have Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Bank, and others. It could also be, UN programs, for example, UNEP, UNDP. You have also FAO, you have IFAD, and UNIDO, and others. They could also be, NGOs, international NGOs. For example, you have the Conservation International, or the IUCN as well. So these agencies support countries, member states, to be able to come up with, identify priority areas for investing into the environment. It could be interesting to note that the GEF funds are catalytic in nature. That means they are meant to trigger investments in environmental protection. On their own, the GEF funds alone are not meant to implement any project at all. So there has to be money that is coming from somewhere else, which is known as co-finance. And then the GEF is going to top up the money to be able to cater for the environmental concerns that other development programs are not able to, due to maybe financial constraints, among other reasons. Yeah. Then, if as a country you want to access GEF funds, the GEF works on what is known as a phases or cycles, if you like. So as we speak right now, the GEF has just received about, or pledged an amount of about $4.1 billion to be implemented over the next 4 years. So the GEF is now going to start GEF 7 phase or cycle. So that means there was first of all pilot phase, then GEF 1, GEF 2, GEF 3, up to GEF 7 now. So it's every 4 years. Now, all the member states are allocated resources which they're supposed to use over a period of 4 years. Now, this means country A could receive $10 million, country B could receive $11 million, and country F could receive $15 million. Why is this disparity? Well, so the GEF has an index system, and through the process or the system called STAR, which is System for Transparent Allocation of Resources, they're able to determine how much money a country is or can receive based on its performance, its potential to generate global environmental benefits, which is the core business of the GEF, as well as its socioeconomic development index. So when they combine these indicators, they come up with an indication of how much a country is able to get and be able to implement over a period of 4 years. Now, this is relevant to 3 focal areas, essentially reflecting the mandate that the GEF has towards conventions. So we're talking about biodiversity focal area, we're talking about land degradation focal area, we're talking about climate change focal area. There are other focal areas as well, but they do not fall within the category of this resource allocation. Yeah. So this is the major way through which the GEF actually, allocates or gives or supports countries to respond to the environmental challenges that they are facing. Besides that, the GEF also has what is known as a corporate program, this small grants program, which is managed by the UNDP on behalf of the GEF. So if you've been following, I did mention that I was mentioning about the GEF funds at the level of the governments. So the governments can receive the money through the agencies. But what about small community-led organizations or community-led organizations that do not have easy access or direct access to the government or to the GEF system? How would they be able to participate or be able to have access to the funds? So the small grants program is an avenue to support local initiatives. It's community action, global impacts. So that by giving financial support to these communities, they can be effective stewards of natural resources which underpin their own livelihoods. And so these communities are able to implement projects in biodiversity, chemicals and waste management, land degradation, climate change, etc., etc. The important thing to note is that these monies are targeted towards small local NGOs, no international NGOs or private entities, the women, youth, and indigenous communities. And so far as we speak, this program has been running in more than 125 countries, supporting about or more than 20,000 community-led programs. And so it's an opportunity that the GEF gives to local institutions to be able to take part in developing and contributing to sustainable development in their own capacity. Yes, so the Small Grants Program actually supports these local-led initiatives. And there are three types of or regimes of funding. One, you can get about $2,000 to $5,000 US for strategic planning, identification of the most priority areas in which you can invest the money. And then the second regime is about 50,000, but the average is about 25,000 to be able to implement a project. And once that is implemented, you can also access about 150,000, which would be like a way of scaling up earlier initiatives. This is for Small Grants Program. Now, you might be following me and you're coming from the private sector entity and you're wondering, where is your place when it comes to the GEF funding system? Well, the GEF takes private sector engagement as an operational priority as well. And so you could be a large corporation, you could be a small enterprise, you could be an individual entrepreneur, or you could be a market facilitator. There's a place for you within the GEF system. And the GEF would be engaging with you to be able to see if there's a possibility of deploying, for example, innovative financial instruments to be able to respond to the environmental challenges that the world is facing today. Which could also be that you can contribute by engaging with the GEF through improving institutional capacities somewhere to be able to do, for example, renewable energy and things like that. So as a private sector, there's a place for you to engage with the GEF, within the GEF funding pool. There's a potential for you to be able to get funding from there. Yeah. So having spoken about the GEF, I think in greater details, I want to now draw your attention to two other sources of funding, because the GEF as a financial mechanism is not the only financial source of funding to be able to respond to the environmental challenges that the world is facing today. So the second option or funding source is actually the Green Climate Fund, which was established some years ago, and it's meant to be able to support countries in terms of adaptation and mitigation against climate change. And Mother Earth is the mother to everything, is the mother to all the natural resources that we have. And if we keep on biting it, as we all know, you don't bite the finger that feeds you. And so the Green Climate Fund is there to support programs and projects that are targeting climate adaptation and climate mitigation, and particularly for vulnerable countries like least developed countries and the small island developing states who have compromised abilities, capacities to be able to respond and adapt to the impacts of climate change and impacts of climate change. The third option in this case is the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, which was actually established or launched last year in 2017, at the 13th UNCCD COP in China. So this financial port is very important, and it was established to raise about $300 million to be able to respond to the Sustainable Development Goal number 15, life on land. And so far, fortunately, about 30% of the target has been raised from different sources. So we hope that more players are going to come on board to be able to contribute to the sport. Yeah. And so as a fund, this LDN fund will be funding projects and supporting projects that are going to have three promises. One, that the projects are going to be able to generate global environmental benefits. Number two, projects are going to contribute to the socio-economic well-being of the communities where they are going to be implemented. Number three, they are going to promise some financial returns when the money is invested in those projects. When we talk about generating global environmental benefits, what do we exactly mean? These are various global environmental benefits. For example, when you have 1 hectare of land that is degraded, like soil degradation is really, really massive on that piece of land, and the productive capacity of that land has been compromised. When you invest funds on that piece of land and it comes back to life, it's able to sequester, for example, carbon, and people are able to use it for their livelihoods. That is an environmental benefit that you have created. So land restoration is a very important global environmental benefit that actually earns support from the from the funding avenues that I've just spoken to you about. Yeah. So in wrapping up, as you could see, we have environmental challenges today impacting about 2.6 billion people all over the world that directly depend on land for their survival. I'm talking about survival. But there's also the political will that has been demonstrated through the establishment of different conventions, but also the establishment of this financial mechanism to support the cries of the people that depend on land and other resources. Now, you are in this room following my presentation, either as a private sector person, or as an academician, or civil society organization person, or whoever you are. It's good that we are actually following one avenue of trying to actually contribute in our own capacity, in our own way, to restore our degraded land so that more people can have access to better livelihoods and their well-being can be improved. I would like to assure you that the momentum is created, and let us all jump on this bandwagon and contribute in our own capacity to restoring our land. I'm very passionate about this, and I sincerely thank you very much for having taken your time to be able to listen to this. And I hope I've inspired you in a certain way to be able to say, okay, things are really bad in some way, but there's hope somewhere, because there are people who are working hard to be able to support financially and technically the efforts that you are undertaking wherever you are, as an individual person or as a company or as a team or as a community. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.